All right, Stace, are we good on technology side of things?
So far, so good.
Okay. Mr. Chair, I think it's 7 o'clock, so whenever you're ready.
Very good, thank you. I'd like to open the meeting of the Sister Heights Planning Commission on March 24th at 7 p.m. Would you call the roll, please?
Commissioner Engel,
Here.
Commissioner Magnavowski,
Here.
Commissioner Nishimura,
I'm here.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Here.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Here.
Vice Chair Flowers,
Present.
Chair Sheeler,
Here. Okay, let me go back to where I should have started, and let's do a flag salute. Commissioner Turner Mike, can I ask you to lead us in the salute, please?
Sure. I pledge allegiance to the flag, the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Next item.
Presentation, a resolution for recognition of former planning commissioners.
Is Mr. Commissioner Lagomasino going to be on the call?
He said he'd be here. He may be having technical difficulties. I have not seen him try to join yet. If he does, I will let him in.
Very well. Well, Commissioner Schaefer is on the meeting, and I would certainly like to recognize him for his service to the Planning Commission of Citrus Heights. And I can read all the whereases, Tim, but certainly when you get the document, you can read all those whereases. But certainly we appreciate your time, your focus, and your effort on the Planning Commissioner. As most of all of you know, Mr. Schaefer is now on the City Council. So he continues his service to the public, and we all very much appreciate it, as does the community. So Tim, congratulations on your time serving on the Planning Commission, and good luck serving on the council.
So, thank you very much. I'd just like to say a couple things here. I did not get the pleasure to work with Commissioner Turner Mike or Commissioner Nishimura, sorry, but it was a pleasure serving with you, Tom and Marcel, and Commissioner Engel and Van Duker. Great team. Thank you very much. Great contribution. And again, I do want to commend staff for a job well done. And thank you very much for the recognition. And I look forward to hearing from any of you. If you have any concerns, I certainly would be all ears if that's a concern. So thank you very much. With that, I will let you get on with your business.
Thank you very much, Tim. Appreciate it. Next item, please.
Calendar approval of minutes for February 10th, 2020.
Do any of the commissioners have any corrections to the minutes? I'm seeing shaking heads, so I presume none. I previously today gave my comments to Stacy. There were a couple small corrections where ex-Commissioner Schaefer's name showed up in place of my name, which tends to continue to happen, but oh well. But there was really nothing else of any tremendous substance. So Do I have a motion to accept the minutes?
I will make the motion to approve the minutes.
That's Mike Nishimura. Stacy,
Thank you.
Second.
and that was and Mr. Commissioner Van Duker. It's a bit challenging for Stacy to, would you please identify yourself to assist her when you make either comments or motions, please?
Are we ready for roll call?
Yes, I'm sorry.
That's okay. Commissioner Engel,
Yeah, here, sorry.
do you, for a motion, are you approving the minutes?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Commissioner Maknowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Nishimura,
Aye.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Aye.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Aye.
Vice Chair Flowers,
Aye.
Chair Schaefer.
See, it keeps happening.
Oh, I'm sorry about, yeah, you know what? I will get it. I will. We talked about this earlier today. I am so sorry. Chair Sheeler,
Aye.
minutes passed. Thank you.
As I said to Stacy earlier today, it's not only that Schaefer and Sheeler so much alike. To complicate it, it had to be Tim and Tom. So it's okay. Next item, please.
Public comment. Under Government Code Section 54954.3, members of the audience may address the commission on any item within the jurisdiction of the commission or on any agenda item. Those wishing to speak on non-agenda items will be called upon at the beginning of the meeting. Those wishing to speak for or against an agenda item will be called upon after the presentation by the City Planning Department and the applicant for that agenda item. Casey, do we have anything?
Do we have any speakers for non-agenda items?
No speakers.
Thank you.
Next item, please.
Public hearing, and we have none tonight.
Thank you. Next item, please.
Regular calendar. Item 7A, 2020 General Plan Annual Progress Report. Staff recommends the Planning Commission recommend the City Council approve the 2020 General Plan Progress Report and direct staff to forward the report to appropriate agencies in accordance with Government Code Section 65400.
Good evening, commissioners. My name is Eric Singer. To the new commissioners, it's a pleasure to meet you all and looking forward to when we can do these again in person. But for now, this will do. I hope everybody can hear me clearly through my mask. I'll try to speak as loudly and clearly as I can. So as Stacy said, we're just going to be reviewing the General Plan Annual Progress Report. Apologies to commissioners that have heard this very similar presentation from last year, but we are going to be covering some of the same information as it's important to make sure that all commissioners are on the same page. So we'll be starting by looking at simply just, the basics of the general plan. As you may or may not know, every city and county in California must have a general plan, and it's considered the constitution for the city, for how we are planning our development, how we look forward for, a good 10 to 20 year time horizon and say, this is how we would like the city to grow. This is the way in which we would like our development to occur. And in that way, it provides policy direction. So we have specific overarching goals, more specifically policies and actions that are in place to help get us to where we want to go. So there are 7 mandatory elements of every general plan. These include land use, circulation, housing, conservation, open space, noise, and safety. Many other cities have, optional elements, including things like parks and rec or economic development, historic preservation. It's dependent on the makeup of the city, demographics, history, etc. A general plan can be amended 4 times a year. it's a fairly common practice. A lot of the time will occur to keep up to date with changes in state law or changes maybe to our zoning code that also have to be in compliance with the general plan. So we want to make sure everything is lined up in that sense. Our first general plan as a city was adopted in 2000 after, obviously a lengthy public input process. And the last time we did a comprehensive update was in 2011. Now, a requirement of any general plan is that every jurisdiction is required to prepare the annual report. And that's how we are doing towards achieving these goals, policies that have been set forth in our general plan. Specifically, the housing element of every general plan is the way that the city is providing a framework so that we can hopefully create housing opportunities and not constrain them. Obviously, the city cannot build the housing ourselves, but we can do everything within our power to create policies and programs that allow for fertile ground for development. The way in which the state is allocating the number of housing units that each city is required to build during a certain housing element period is through what's called RHNA, or Regional Housing Needs Allocation. It's the process to identify the total number of housing units that should be built over an 8-year housing element period. And that number, through some complicated machinations, is disseminated to councils of government that is further disseminated to jurisdictions within each council of government, ours being SACOG, Sacramento Area Council of Governments. Are there any questions on just the basics of the general plan or RHNA or the housing element, anything of that nature? No? All right, moving on. So for the annual progress report, the two agencies that are interested, obviously, in our progress towards achieving our housing element goals are the Governor's Office of Planning and Research, as well as Housing and Community Development. So OPR and HCD, very important acronyms to remember, considering we do most of our reporting to them. The most important thing to remember about the annual progress report is that it is a mandatory report to both of these agencies if we want to be eligible for any state grant funding. So incredibly important that we get this submitted to them in a timely manner. It is due to HCD April 1st of every year. So for this year's APR, typically in any given reporting year, we try to condense the information as much as possible and really highlight any programs or policies that have made significant progress in any given year. In this case, for 2020, obviously COVID-19 impacted many of the city's development plans and our progress towards several goals, but there were quite a few bright spots actually amidst the pandemic. A few of these include the Mitchell Farms and the Northridge Grove subdivisions being issued building permits, so further housing growth going on there, as well as a few projects being entitled, including the Fair Oaks Senior Apartments, which was 110 very low income units. And then additionally to just some of the highlights that are included in the annual progress report, we are required to provide updates on specifically the housing policies that are outlined within the general plan. So that is as part of the APR, that table D, looking at goals 24 through 28, those are housing specific policies that we are required to update every year to tell HCD, yes, we have made definitive progress, or this is still ongoing, et cetera, et cetera. Additionally, we're supposed to look at the RHNA number for the housing element period and how we are making progress toward that number. So looking a little bit more specifically at a couple of these projects that had been approved in 2020, the Fair Oaks Senior Apartments, as I mentioned, was 110 units of very low income, which is actually very important for HCD. They are, a big focus statewide has been ensuring that all jurisdictions are meeting the housing needs for their lower income citizens. And then additionally to Fair Oaks, we also had the Auburn Heights Small Lot subdivision, which was the first of its kind, allowing for higher density unit counts to occur on parcels that would otherwise be undersized. So a couple of, bright spots. In addition to the projects that were entitled by the Planning Commission, the building department issued 139 building permits for 139 housing units. The majority of those were very low income that were part of that Fair Oaks housing or senior apartment complex. And then there were 28 moderate or above moderate income permits issued as well. A relatively low number of units were issued certificates of occupancy, quote unquote, finaled, so allowing residents to move in. However, in a given year, if you have 139 housing units issued building permits, typically you'll see in the following year that a good number of those units will be issued certificates of occupancy. So I would expect 2021 to see a fair number of those units from Fair Oaks turning into finaled units. So as I mentioned, part of the reporting to HCD is done through RENA, and this table is just a snapshot from the Excel spreadsheet that we use to calculate what those numbers are. As you can see, the column for 2020 had great number of very low income units, and actually put us well on our way to achieving the total number that are required during the 8-year period, with only 27 remaining. Now, you may notice that we are short, obviously, of the total number required. However, that is not uncommon. Many jurisdictions around California also, experience this same unit shortfall when trying to meet their RENA numbers. So the APR is also, we are required to include information, about these specific things, like, any properties that were rezoned to meet certain housing needs, any units that were acquired and or preserved, any commercial development bonuses or projects that were approved with streamlining pursuant to SB 35, and any inventory of surplus land that the city has in the given reporting year. So are there any questions on the APR itself?
Yeah, I have a question.
None?
This
Oh,
is
sure.
McNofsky. How much money does the city get from state from all these grants? I know I can look it up, but I'm sure you have a number on hand.
I'll let Casey answer that one.
It really varies year to year. It depends on there was a recent influx in housing funds after there was a big legislative year for housing a few years ago, so that's all coming to fruition now. But a lot of our grants are also in the transportation realm, and so for doing our roadway projects like Auburn Boulevard, those are in the multi-million dollars, and so those are competitive, and it just depends on the year. So every year is a little bit different. Yeah. So that's a long answer to your question.
Thanks. And also, does the unit shortage affect us from getting future grants or lowers our grant requests in the future?
As of right now, no. The state changes the laws related to housing all the time. But as of right now, know that we are required to demonstrate we have adequate land available for housing. But being that cities are not in the business of building housing, that's as far as we need to go.
Thank you.
Chair Schuler, I also have a question.
Yes, are you hearing at all from anybody the recent spike in construction material costs slowing some of these projects down?
We
I'd
have
say anecdotally. Sorry, go ahead, Casey.
Yeah, we have heard that anecdotally, as Eric said, there's been delays because of COVID. There's been delays because of shortage of labor and materials over the last couple of years. But as you can see, we're still hitting numbers off the charts compared to previous years. So there's been a lot of previous planning that is coming to fruition at this point.
Can you guys remind us too, I know there's an 8-year term on satisfying that. When does that expire?
At the end of May 2021 of this year. So,
we're supposed to have met the numbers by the end of May.
Technically, that is the requirement of all jurisdictions. As Casey mentioned, we've never been penalized. No jurisdiction has technically been penalized for not meeting those numbers, but they want to make sure that you have the outlay provided, adequate land, and that you're not putting any constraints on housing. That's the biggest thing, at least on the government side of things, is that none of your policies are going to be actively discouraging or preventing housing from occurring. So
the number of cities or local governments that are achieving their arena numbers, you can count on one hand. I think it's around 4 or 5.
No, I bet. Thank you, guys.
of course. Any additional questions? Okay. Our recommended motion is for the Planning Commission to move to accept the general plan annual progress report and forward the report to the City Council.
This is Vice Chair Flowers, and I move that we accept the general plan annual report and forward the report to the City Council.
I second that. But I want to confirm, Casey, I did send the email with the corrections. So I don't know if that's going into the report or not.
Sure, there were a couple of minor corrections on the year that the city started the process for the Sylvan School, and then a minor change clarifying what the rental housing inspection program, the acronym for that. So those will get incorporated in the plan as it moves forward to the City Council.
Commissioner Flowers, this is Ryan Jones. Are you willing to amend your motion to incorporate those changes?
Yes. So I move to accept the general plan with the amendments as stated by Commissioner, I guess, Eric, is that you?
I think it might have been Casey, but either way, but we got it.
You can say staff.
Okay, for the staff, yes. So I just moved to accept the general plan with the amendments as stated and forward the report to the City Council.
I second that, Michnowski.
Are we ready for roll call?
We are.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Magnavowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Nishimura,
Aye.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Aye.
Commissioner Van Duker. Did we lose Andrew?
Oh, aye.
Oh.
Aye.
Thank you. Vice Chair Flowers,
Aye.
Chair Sheeler,
Aye.
motion passed unanimously. Thank you.
Next item, please.
Item 7B, Transportation Impact Study, and 5B, SB 7343 Guidelines. Staff recommends Planning Commission review the draft Transportation Impact Study and SB 743 Implementation Guidelines and recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution adopting the guidelines, determining the adoption of the draft guidelines is not a project under CEQA, and determining thresholds of significance contained within the draft guidelines that have been prolonged pursuant to CEQA guidelines.
Thank you, Chair Sheeler and Stacy. Casey Kemper, our planning manager. Here to introduce you to John Gard, who is from Fair and Piers. They are our consultant on this project, and they do a fair amount of work for the city. They're experts in the transportation arena. And this is largely, as John will cover, in response to changing state laws that we're adhering to. So it is a very complicated topic, and John's going to go into it in more detail, but you will be seeing more and more of this as projects come to the Planning Commission as well. So these are the rules that are in place to guide traffic analysis as we move forward. So I also have here is Leslie Bloomquist, our city engineer. So between her and John and myself, we'll be able to answer any questions you may have. With that, I'll turn it over to John Gard.
Thank you, Casey, very much. I'm going to share my screen right now, and if sure I have screen sharing ability. Yes, I do. Excellent. All right. Can everybody see the presentation, the cover page, SB 743 implementation plan for Citrus Heights? Yes?
Yes.
Perfect. Okay, thank you. And if by chance I do get dropped from this call, it happened once already in this, and I have no idea why, but I will join as quickly as possible. I think it took me less than a minute last time. So fingers crossed the technology is good to us. So again, thank you, Casey. I'm John Gard. I'm with Fair and Pierce Transportation Consultants based in Roseville. And as Casey mentioned, we have a presentation for you tonight. I'm just going to go to the next slide. That is on its face looks like an awful long presentation with 10 items. However, when we look at them in isolation, each of these items is basically one slide. So the bulk of the technical discussion is items 4 through 9. So this is probably about 20 to 25 minutes. I'm purposely keeping it at a fairly high level. This can get very detailed very quick. The rules of environmental review in California changed pretty massively with SB 743. And so I'm going to try to keep it high level. And then if there's questions, even during the presentation or afterwards, I'm more than happy to answer them. Okay, so I'm just going to go basically topic by topic. So Senate Bill 743, the intent of this bill was to balance local congestion management with state's goals, California's goals for encouraging infill development, improving public health through active transportation, which means bicycling and walking, and reducing greenhouse gas emissions, of which vehicle miles traveled through automobiles is one of the main sources of GHG or greenhouse gas emissions. These are the goals, and SB 743 was actually signed by the governor back in 2013. So agencies have had actually almost 7 years to prepare for it to become fruition. And back in 2017, as you can see from these boxes here, in November 2017, the California Office of Planning and Research, who was entrusted with developing guidance for how 743 would be implemented by agencies, they developed their final guidelines for how 743 would be implemented. And we'll be talking about those guidelines as technical advisory, as we call it, quite a bit in the coming slides. And in 2018, the Natural Resources Agency formally updated the CEQA statutes to include SB 743 and its intent, which we'll talk about very specifically on the next slide. And then SB 743 became law or required for implementation statewide back in July 1st of 2020. So let me go to the next slide of what SB 743 is doing to the transportation landscape within the California Environmental Quality Act. So in simplest terms, it requires the use of vehicle miles traveled, or VMT, as the basis for transportation impact analysis for both land use projects and transportation projects. Some of you that have reviewed EIRs in the past or mitigated negative declarations have probably seen level service, intersection level service, A, B, C, all the way through E and F as the CEQA standard used to evaluate projects. So the guidelines, the CEQA guidelines say the level service may no longer be used in CEQA documents. Instead, VMT is being used. So really what this whole presentation is about is how is the city moving forward to SB, to transitioning away from level service to VMT. However, as you can see in the slide, level service is still allowed to be included in general plans. It's in the city's general plan, it's in most agencies' general plans. TIS guidelines, Transportation Impact Study guidelines, include them, and level service is used by a number of agencies to identify what physical improvements may be necessary for a proposed project to meet a level service goal of the city's general plan, and then attached as a condition of approval. Now, SB 743 has become something that it's basically something all cities and counties in the state many have adopted it, many are still grappling with it, but many have not even started. So even though, this became law and required statewide July 1st, 2020, we do a lot of SB 743 work, and I'm really pleased to see Citrus Heights in the position they're in. They're ahead of many agencies just by virtue of being in this position right here at this minute, having this before the Planning Commission. There's a lot of agencies, even in this region, that have not left the starting line yet. So here's where things get a little more challenging. So lead agency concerns. These are kind of a short list of concerns agencies have to grapple with when they think about SB 743. It introduces a new legal risk for CEQA content. VMT is a new metric. It's not known how the courts will interact or how the courts will act on things. Level service is been tried and true for 50 years almost. So it's new, and there's already been 2 lawsuits on SB 743 that have been filed, one up in the Sacramento area, one in Southern California, and maybe even more since then. So the courts are going to kind of sort some of this out, but it does bring up a little bit of technical risk, and we thought about that a lot when we developed the criteria we developed, which we'll be presenting. The technical guidance, even though the technical advisory, which I'll show on the next slide, gets into a lot of the technical detail, there is still a bit of a lack of consistency, and so you'll see a lot of agencies doing things in their own sort of way. One thing we always say is no agency should compare their VMT numbers with another agency's, because as we mentioned later, there's many different ways of calculating VMT, and it's very unique to the jurisdiction. Also, as we'll explain later, the lexicon for VMT is it's level service A through F is almost a report card, kind of thing. Although it's almost a report card. VMT is way more complicated. It's and I've got an example of what that is, kind of trying to keep it pretty high level, but it is a little more complicated, but we try to simplify it as best we can for these types of purposes. But and then finally, increased development costs. If we do have significant VMT impacts, there's mitigation. Mitigation typically costs money, and developers may look at that as yet one more burden that's placed on top of a lot of other impact fees. So it is something a lot of other agencies are concerned about. Now, Citrus Heights, like all these other agencies, has had to make a lot of decisions, and I applaud Casey and Leslie for serving point to kind of get us through a number of these types of decisions. So what measure are we going to use to actually calculate or measure VMT? VMT cannot, it's not easy to measure it. It's not like counting the number of cars entering and exiting a driveway. It's not like that. I'll define VMT in a little bit, but there's different ways of trying to calculate VMT, and the city had to make a decision on what was best for them. The technical advisory, as you see in this document, right to the right here, includes exemptions and screening, which I'll define here later. Some agencies have chosen to endorse it, others have not. So that took a little bit of back and forth to figure out, okay, what are we going to do specific? What makes sense to the city? Thresholds are basically, how is the city going to judge projects relative to its VMT efficiency? So every agency has to decide on what number, probably the single most important number in this whole study. And we'll talk about that as well. Project versus cumulative is not so much an issue to Citrus Heights since it's built out, but it's another issue a lot of other cities are grappling with, the VMT impacts associated with a baseline condition, as well as cumulative if a city's got a lot of growth plans. So that's another issue. And then finally, VMT mitigation feasibility for VMT is important. And I'll talk about that in a little bit more detail, but these are all things that made this kind of a complicated process, a lot of back and forth, leaning on what other agencies are doing, some legal opinions, things like that. So let me keep moving forward here. We're going to get a little bit technical now. We're into slide 4. And so VMT Defined. What is this thing, this acronym? So vehicle miles traveled is defined as 1 mile driven by a vehicle. It's typically a daily value in it, meaning it's on a weekday. It's a daily value, so it's units or miles. Consistent with the technical advisory, VMT estimates are not truncated agency boundaries. So what that means is that if a resident of Citrus Heights leaves their house and works in downtown Sacramento, the whole length of that trip counts towards that resident's VMT, not just the amount of the VMT within the city itself. So that is an important consideration, that we're not limited at agency boundaries. And then when we think about a VMT value, VMT is kind of it's known as an efficiency metric, VMT per whatever, and per unit, per person, whatever. And it helps us understand the relative efficiency of a different mix of land uses or transportation improvements. But VMT is not really a direct measure of congestion or delay. So a given VMT value will not tell you whether the roads will be congested, stop and go or not. So I just wanted to make that clear. So diving just a tad deeper. So this is, in the transportation business, we have to think of basically trip purposes. And this is a theoretical resident of Citrus Heights living in a house. And there's some acronyms we use: home to work, home to other. And this is basically the daily trip pattern of this person, let's say. And so basically the person drives from home to work, this is a nice little office building, 11 miles, regardless of whether it's in Citrus Heights or not, but it's 11 miles of travel. They then drive from work for 10 miles to get a soda or a coffee. This is called a non-home based trip because neither end of the trip's at the home, and then another 2 miles from that shop home. So this sort of route, this chain of trips in terms of home-based travel, 2 ends of it are here, that's 13 miles. Likewise, we do the same thing here, home to the gas station, to the grocery store and back. So when we add up 1 + 2 + 11 + 2, we get 16 miles. So if this person only made these trips, they'd be generating 16 miles of VMT per day. So that's sort of and there's a similar process for employees and for visitors and things like that. So that's just dipping our toe in the water a little bit about how the trip purpose works. But when we think about what the home-based VMT is, it's basically all travel from your house to wherever you're going. So what do we do with that then? So what's the methodology to figure out VMT? And so we're going to dive a little deeper here still. So at Fair and Peers, we've been looking at SB 743 projects for a number of different agencies. I think I've done at least a half dozen, and it really varies. The technical approach is taken varies depending on the type of city, the availability of models, the growth potential of the city, a whole variety of different things. And so city staff and us, we discussed internally the pros and cons of a couple different alternatives, and we landed on using quote unquote big data as the preferred method of analyzing VMT. So if you look in the top right corner here, big data basically refers to anonymous, that's a key word here, anonymous location records from smartphones and mobile apps on your iPhone or whatever phone you might be using, in-vehicle navigation. It allows us to understand travel patterns and behaviors and user types. If you watched any of the presentations we gave for Sunrise Tomorrow, we had used some big data there to understand who's traveling on Greenback Lane and going to Sunrise Mall. Same type of process here, but this is it's focused differently. It's more towards SB 743. So what we've done is we hired, purchased data from Streetlight Data Incorporated. They're a third-party vendor that obtains this data from the big cell phone service providers, like AT&T or Verizon. I don't know which firm it is, but they keep that anonymous to us. And then we get data, basically average VMT per resident, per worker, and per visitor, disaggregated or broken into individual census block groups. And a census block group is the smallest geography that this data comes in. And in Citrus Heights, there's about 61 census block groups. So basically, we know, and this data was for mid-weekdays in 2019. So all Tuesdays, Wednesdays, and Thursdays of 2019. So that is a huge database, right? It's an enormous amount of data, which gives us confidence in the sample size. And so what that data allows us to do is to say, okay, well, what's the VMT per resident in census block group X, block group Y? How does that compare to each other and to other averages? So that's basically the data product that was purchased and then analyzed. So again, here are the census block groups in the map to the right. The last 4 digits are of the specific block group out of the 12-digit code. And what's important to realize here is, again, 61 distinct census block groups. The asterisk represents blocks that are both within Citrus Heights and an adjacent jurisdiction. So we had to deal with those in a very specialized way. But again, for each of these block groups, we have VMT per resident, employer, and visitor. So one thing I want to make clear here is that if this is 1391, this is Sunrise Mall. So we have Greenback and Sunrise. So if somebody works at Sunrise Mall and lives over here and they drive this way in, for the VMT per employee, it's based on the length of that travel for that person who works in this zone at Sunrise Mall. There's also some residential here. So the person that travels here, if they travel to downtown, that qualifies as home-based travel. So there is a little nuance. So that when you hear VMT per employee, it's based on employees, people that work in a given census block group. I know it's getting a little complicated, or it may be, but basically that's what the technical details are. And if we were using a travel demand model, we would be doing things in a very similar way. And we've done this with all sorts of models. In this case, we have a high level of confidence in the streetlight data, and we'll explain to you in a little bit how we know that. Okay, so just, there is a report that is on the city's website. It's also in this staff packet that is called the SB 743 Implementation Guidelines Report. And it has a whole series of FAQs, frequently asked questions. And I wanted to add just 4 of the FAQs because I think it may be on people's minds. How does this data work? And whenever I do these presentations, how is this possible, right? So I picked 4 that seem to come up more frequently. So, we have these, basically we've got the device. So it's the cell phone, and there's a relational between the cell phone and the person who's, because it's the same person over and over. So how do we know the trip starts and ends? Well, it's when the device moves, and once the device stops moving for within 5 meters in 5 minutes, the trip is ended. So how's the length of the trip determined? Well, it's GPS satellites with algorithms determining the route. Streetlight has all sorts of complex algorithms that use in-pavement traffic count data, census data, all sorts of things like that. We use it for traffic count data all the time. So it's a very reliable source of information. How would we determine a resident of a census block group? Well, they know when where the phone is spending most of their overnight hours. The phone is in, from 11 p.m. to 5 a.m. It's in this census block group. So that's known as the resident location. Same thing with the worker location. So it's a really smart way of dealing with this. And we've used it on a number of projects, and it was a really good application in this case. So let's take a look at how the data worked out for Citrus Heights. So this table compares on the left column here, weighted average VMT for all zones in Citrus Heights versus the entire SACOG region, because the streetlight data also provided that information. And then we have it by resident, worker, and visitor. So what we see is that resident VMT in Citrus Heights is about 13% lower than the regional average. I think that's reasonable. Citrus Heights is a little closer to city center. It's a balanced, type of area with a lot of housing, a lot of jobs, a lot of retail in the area. It's not a bedroom community like some of the more suburban locations. Makes a lot of sense. And the workers trips are actually 29% lower than the regional average. And again, that makes sense based on looking at the job classifications, and we know that there's correlation between job pay and commute distance and some things like that. But we also check this against things like the 2012 California Household Travel Survey, SACOG's 2018 Household Survey for reasonableness, and those comparisons are included in the SB 743 report in case you're interested. So really, at the end of the day, what we have is VMT expressed as home-based for residents, so all trips by the resident from home to work for employees. So it's just basically the employee in a zone working back. And then for the visitor trips, it's attraction-based. And the relational term here is only because you think about it, visitor trips to a zone do not occur every day. I don't go shopping at Costco every day, or I don't play golf every day at the same place. So we had to normalize that in some way. And it's kind of a bit of a complex mathematical thing, but if you want to, the report has it. If you want to ask questions at the end, I can describe it, but it's basically normalizing things so that we have an apples to apples comparison here. So probably the most important question is, well, what is the city going to use to evaluate projects under SB 743? And as you can see from this slide, the city's chosen to follow the OPR technical advisory and its recommendation, which is derived from ARB's scoping plan, which is to establish a VMT significance threshold for land use projects specifically that are subject to CEQA that's 15% below that of existing development. So in other words, new projects have to be better than 15% below existing development. So it's a bit of a higher bar. The city, per the technical advisory, there's flexibility in terms of what's defined as existing development. Is it the city proper? Is it the entire region? Is it a subset? And a lot of agencies are doing things in their own way. The city has decided to use the entire SACOG region as the basis for the comparison. That's the same thing that both City of Sacramento and Sacramento County are doing. So there's consistency there, and it's something that's fully endorsed in the technical advisory. So that's basically the significance criteria for land use projects. So let's kind of segue a little bit towards the exemption. So what does all this mean when projects come to the city for environmental review? So again, the technical advisory has several areas of exemptions, and exemptions are basically mean that VMT impacts are presumed less than significant. And the first one is small projects, and small projects basically are, their VMT generation is not to a level that would be considered significant based on their small size. The values you see here, 19 single family units, 32 multifamily, and that 14 KSF of office those are slightly different than what's in the technical advisory, but calibrated to what the trip generation characteristics in the city are. So small projects is an opportunity. Just about all agencies are grabbing on, using that method, that exemption as well. Projects near high quality transit is another exemption, putting land use, near high quality transit, which is defined as 4 buses per hour during peak periods, is another exemption area, provided the type of land use is appropriate. So that's one. Affordable housing qualifies, as does redevelopment projects, presuming they generate a net decrease in VMT relative to the project that was there previously. And then local serving retail projects of 50,000 square feet of retail or less also are considered exempt, according to technical advisory. So those are the 5 exemption areas. And for a city like Citrus Heights that isn't getting 900 unit subdivisions or something of this size, this provides a lot of flexibility to the city, and we'll get into this in a little more detail here shortly. The other thing that's discussed in the technical advisory is screening maps, and they're basically developed to identify low VMT generating areas of a city, or in this case, based on census block groups. The premise is that land uses of similar size and scale and type to what's there before will generate similar low VMT generating characteristics. And so screening maps are commonly used in a number of jurisdictions, and premise being that projects located in VMT efficient areas with low VMT would be presumed less than significant. Excuse me. And so we put together screening maps for the city, and this is the first one, and there's a lot going on here, so I'm going to attempt to kind of put a bit of a lay of the landscape here. So this is average home-based VMT per resident. So this is, if it's a residential project, this would be the map you would look at. And the high-quality transit corridor is shown in yellow. So right now, RT's gone back to their post-COVID service times, and so we do have this qualifying currently, as well as this section of Auburn Boulevard qualifying. So these are, and again, the high quality transit corridor extends a half mile either way beyond the edge of the intersection. So we have that. And then the areas that are crosshatched, as you see in these areas, these have characteristics where the VMT per person is 85% or less of the regional average. So the crosshatched areas are the low VMT generating areas. And as you can see from this map, a pretty significant amount of the residential areas are in the below category. In fact, about 50% of them. And when we think about, does this make sense? Well, one with these areas up here probably would not be doing the best because they're furthest from 80, kind of furthest from the majority of the goods and services. Whereas in the immediate area of Sunrise Marketplace, or in this area here, you may be closer to 80, you're closer to goods and services, schools are there. So the results intuitively made a great deal of sense to us. As they did for the employee screening maps, which this shows here. You recall in that table that the employee average VMT per day was substantially less than the SACOG average, and not surprisingly, an even greater percentage, almost 75% of this is below that regional threshold 85% value. So in this case, the vast majority of these zones, if there was new office or other employment generating uses, would be presumed to be less than significant if falling into these zones. But there are some areas that don't that don't pass the test. And when we look at those, and I'll do the interest of time, I'm going to kind of pass over them quickly, but I'll just mention this one real quick. This right here, this is west of Sylvan, north of Greenback. This is City Hall. This is a police department, medical office building. These are the types of post office. These are the types of trips where people may be coming longer distances. Whereas, some of this area here, this is Sunrise Marketplace. These may be kind of shorter, part-time jobs, shorter distance trips, things like that. So when we look at this data, it really makes a lot of sense intuitively. And then again, visitor data, this basically shows that, majority of the city's clear. But again, the data is where things shouldn't be great, they're not great. So what is in this area here as you're driving I-80? Well, we know there's a golf course and there's also a cemetery. And despite everything else, being below, those are visitor trips. And people are going to typically travel longer distances to go to those types of uses. So again, a lot of reasonableness of results. Okay, so shifting gears here, and we're almost done, probably just a couple more slides and turn over to Casey. But for VMT impacts that are significant, because we weren't able to exempt them and they didn't pass any of the screening tests. Well, in most cases, we're not expecting there to be significant VMT impacts for the very reason we just mentioned, but the possibility does exist. So unlike level service, and when it was CEQA, we don't add turn lanes to an intersection or add a traffic light or something. Instead, the mitigation is typically in the form of changes to the project, implementing transportation demand management strategies. So ways to reduce the amount of driving of vehicles. The SB 743 report has at least a dozen different TDM strategies that have been screened based on literature showing their effectiveness in a place like Citrus Heights. Everything from transit subsidies to reducing parking supply in some instances, but not a lot. But there's a whole variety of transportation coordinators for office buildings and things like that. So little things that could be implemented if necessary. But it is important that the TDM strategy effectiveness is really specific to the context. If there's not high quality transit nearby, transit subsidies aren't really going to work, right? That kind of thing. And the tenants themselves matter as well. So there is discussion of that topic as well. So there's just a couple more slides here, but VMT analysis for transportation projects also is important and is addressed in Senate Bill 743. And basically what that says is that an impact would be considered significant if a transportation project would lead to what's known as induced travel or increased VMT. In other words, if a road is widened and if you build it, they will come type of logic, more people use it, VMT increases, that's deemed a significant impact. And this is an issue that is a lot of agencies in this region and beyond are grappling with right now, because when VMT impacts for transportation are significant, it's very difficult to mitigate those. And fortunately, the city's in a position where most of its CIP projects are bike, ped, and transit projects, which are specifically exempted under the technical advisory because they're not inducing more VMT. They're actually, focusing on active transportation and transit, and then complete streets. So it's not as much of an issue for the city, but it's an issue in a lot of other communities right now. And this is the report, SB 743 implementation guidelines for the city. It's available online. It includes the methodology. We discussed the FAQs, exemptions, screening maps, thresholds, everything that I covered here, but you can read the details if you'd care to. And then finally, not to be totally overlooked, but it does only get one slide. So the city created a comprehensive set of transportation impact study or TIS guidelines back in 2013. And, really those are really in need of update given Senate Bill 743, which puts the focus on VMT and not level service. So that material change to the TIS guidelines has occurred, as well as some other just basic changes in the transportation industry practices. So basically the TIS guidelines are also, we're on the city's website. Generally speaking, I wouldn't say there was any real substantial changes aside from the LOS VMT alteration. So that is basically my presentation. And I'm going to turn it back over to Casey, and I'll be here for questions. Thank you.
Thanks, John. Chair Sheeler, if you have any questions, happy to answer that. It is a very complicated subject, as you've seen. We think we, kind of wove through the law and made it the best bet that we can for the city, given our context. And really, our goal was to make it as simple as possible, which is hard, but also to help kind of add some certainty and clarity to new development, and avoid having to do an analysis of this nature as many times as we can. By doing this, we incentivize development to occur at the appropriate locations, which is along our transit lines and in our commercial areas, which is in line with what the state's trying to do. So we're trying to kind of tie that together. So with that, happy to answer any questions you may have.
That's sort of like listening to the auditor give the annual auditor report. Any commissioners have questions?
Yeah, I have a few questions. It seems like a pretty bad deal for large developers. What's the alternative to this? Can we not accept it? Can we not approve, even though it's required by the state?
Not really. Yeah. So CEQA is a state law. You have to comply with state law. So if we didn't do this, then every development that we reviewed that was subject to CEQA, we would have to look at VMT trips for every single project, even if we think it was in a low VMT area. It would still be required for us to do that in order to incorporate in the CEQA document. So it'd be very difficult. And some cities are taking that approach where they're just saying, okay, every developer, you need to do your own analysis. But our thought process is to help incentivize development in the right locations, and increase our chances of redevelopment in key areas. So that's kind of the lens that we took on this.
What were some of the lawsuits that other agencies are dealing with? I know you mentioned that in the beginning of the presentation. There was 2 lawsuits.
Yeah, one has to do with the concept, and it's really kind of more intended towards OPR. It has to do with the concept of hiding behind a low VMT generating zone, frankly. And when you're in that area, the impact is less than significant, and therefore there's no mitigation required for VMT. So, but that's exactly what the California Office of Office of Planning and Research has said it should be the plan. So, really, it's somebody attacking the state of California more than, because basically every agency in the state is following, not everyone, but the vast majority are following that guidance that, if we've got a low VMT zone, that's what it is. And then the other one that I'm aware of is in Southern California, and it pertains to somebody taking issue with the threshold that was chosen. In our case, in Citrus Heights' case, we were choosing the entire SACOG region. And in that case, they were choosing I don't want to give you the details exactly, it's complicated, but they were choosing a region that was purportedly favorable to them in an inequitable manner or something like that.
Thank you.
Any other questions? John, I do have a question. What's a pass-through?
A pass-through or a pass-by trip? Let me just make sure I pass through. Where could you repeat the question, please, Chair?
Seemed to be, I'm trying to find it in the document. It's really not that important. It just was, I just couldn't understand how it was defined or how it was used in the computation. So.
Oh, I know what you mean. Okay, so you read the actual report, so I commend you for that. 2 gold stars. So pass-through trips. So a trip that passes through the city. Somebody who lives in Folsom that's going to Sacramento County west of 80 or something like that. That trip, even though it uses city streets, has no bearing on the VMT calculation in the manner that looks at land use, right? So those pass-through trips do not consider, because they have nothing to do with land use associated with land use within the city of Citrus Heights. They're through trips.
All right, thank you.
Yeah.
That's all, Casey.
One more question, this is McNofsky again. In the beginning, you mentioned there's two methods of analyzing VMT. One is project-based, the other is cumulative. What are we voting on? Is there a choice between one or the other, or the city kind of chooses which way to lean on?
Do you want me to answer that, Casey, or do you want to take it?
Go ahead, John.
Yeah, so in the case of Citrus Heights, the two are really not very dissimilar, simply because so much of the city is already built out. When we have a city that's currently 20,000 residents, that's going to be 60,000, like some of the outlying areas, the cumulative VMT picture could be considerably different than the baseline. And the technical advisory actually says that if the baseline VMT impacts are less than significant, it follows that the cumulative VMT impacts would also be less than significant. So some agencies in Sacramento County has in their standards that, we only look at baseline conditions. But other cities are a little bit more wary of that. They're thinking, well, maybe we need to look at cumulative as well. But in the case of Citrus Heights, because it's such a built out area, there's really only just one VMT analysis, and it's a pretty easy argument to make.
Thanks.
Question.
Do I have a motion? Commissioners, do I have a motion?
I'll move. Move to recommend, this is Engel, I'm sorry. Recommend that the City Council adopt a resolution adopting the Transportation Impact Study and SB 743 guidelines, including thresholds of significance and determining the adoption, not a project pursuant to the California Environmental Quality Act, CEQA, per CEQA guidelines, section 15060C3 and 15378. Do you want them all or one at a time?
This is Ryan Jones. One at a time, please. Thank you.
I'll second. This is Vice Chair Flowers.
Thank you.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Maknowski,
Yes, aye.
Commissioner Nishimura,
Aye.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Aye.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Aye.
Vice Chair Flowers,
Aye.
Chair Sheeler.
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously.
Second, I move to recommend the City Council find the thresholds contained within the Transportation Impact Study and SB 743 guidelines are promulgated pursuant to state CEQA guidelines 15064.7.
I second.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Maknowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Nishimura,
Aye.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Aye.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Aye.
Vice Chair Flowers,
Aye.
Chair Sheeler.
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously.
Number 3, I move to recommend the City Council adopt the SB 743 and TIS guidelines.
I second. Maknowski.
Call the roll, please.
Commissioner Engel,
Yes.
Commissioner Maknowski,
Aye.
Commissioner Nishimura,
Aye.
Commissioner Turner Mike,
Aye.
Commissioner Van Duker,
Aye.
Vice Chair Flowers,
Aye.
Commissioner Sheeler.
Aye.
Motion passed unanimously.
I'll take a quick second. Thank you, John, very much for your hard work on this. Appreciate it. It's very complicated. You did a great job explaining such a complicated topic. So thank you very much.
Thank you, everybody. Appreciate it.
Thank you, John.
Thank you.
Chair Sheeler, I just have a simple comment for Stacy. Stacy, I wanted to make sure you knew that it was not me that seconded that second motion.
For For the second motion, I do have you down. Was
I
that?
did not second that. That second came from Commissioner Turner Mike.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for clarifying that. I appreciate it. Okay, it's noted.
Next item, please.
Planning manager items.
Yeah, just wanted to remind you, those that have signed up, and encourage those that haven't, starting tomorrow is the 2021 planning, or sorry, yeah, tomorrow is the Planning Commissioners Academy, the 25th, 26th, 31st, and April 1st. So if you are interested in going, please let Stacy know. It is going to be recorded, and if you aren't able to attend on these dates, you can always browse those later on. So if you're interested, let Stacy know. She can get you the information.
Very good. Thank you, Casey. Commissioners, any other questions for this evening? Very well. I guess I will call and adjourn the meeting. Thank you all for coming.
Thank everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Good night.
Good night.
Good night.